Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CFSY's first ever Facebook Live event. My name is Jody Kent Lavy. I'm the Executive Director of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. I'm delighted to be joining you today from my home in Washington, D.C. I am here in my home with my husband and 3 children. Who may or may not make an appearance at some point during our time together, given the nature of the world in this moment. I know all of you can relate to the unpredictability of all of this in these circumstances with people working remotely. Those of us at the campaign have been working remotely for going on 10 weeks now. It's been challenging, but I have to say that I've stayed motivated knowing that you all are out there working alongside us. And because of my extraordinary colleagues, 2 of whom are with me today, I'm delighted to introduce you to my colleagues, Preston Shipp and Xavier McElrath-Bey. Xavier, Preston, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I just want to check in and say good morning to the, you guys are in Central Time, so it's still morning over there. How are you guys holding up going on week 10 of this COVID crisis?
It's going well. It's going well. Over here, I think much like everyone, just taking it day by day, really hoping the best for everyone, loved ones, friends, others, and mostly concerned for those who are still inside the prison system, whose lives are still in dangerous way, more so than most of us. And so just really trying to remain positive and just thankful to be a part of the CFSY I Can family, and to have great family and friends who check in on me and vice versa. And yeah, just taking it one day at a time.
Thanks. How you doing, Preston?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I work remotely from Nashville, Tennessee, and so it's a warm day today. And my wife and 3 kiddos are outside putting together some patio furniture. So I've got the house nice and quiet. I don't remember ever doing more stuff around the house. I've cut my grass so many times already this year. So, but it is good, to have meaningful work to do. I feel a great sense of gratitude and relief because I know that so many people are not able to work, and it's a hard time for a lot of folks, certainly folks who are inside and their family members. So I feel a real sense of gratitude that I've got this work to do and colleagues to do it with that I care about.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. So Preston, Xavier, and I do a fair amount of traveling in our day jobs in normal times. And one of the joys of that work is being able to engage with our community out in the field. And I don't know about you guys, but I've really missed that these last 9 weeks. And so today, we decided that we wanted to hold this event so that we could engage with many of you more deeply in this moment in the best way we can, given the circumstances. We have been doing a lot of work in response to the COVID crisis that we want to talk about. We want to share with you. That work has been informed by many conversations that we've had, sort of ongoing communications and conversations we're having with folks in our community, our ICANN network, the families, the advocates on the ground in the states. But we wanted to expand the conversation to include a broader community of folks and our entire Facebook family. And so that's what today is about. We're going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in response to COVID and what you can do as partners in this work. And we're going to ask you to tell us what's going on where you are. What questions do you have for us? You can just add those comments and questions in the comments section under the screen where you see us. And our comms team, Sahar, Adam, and Karma, who are working tirelessly behind the scenes and are what make this possible and make us look good. They're standing ready to field those questions, and they'll send them to us so we can make sure to be responsive. But this is really intended to be a conversation with you all so that we can keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on where you are, and to answer questions and talk through how we can work together in this really critical time. So just to start, for those of you who aren't familiar with the campaign, I just want to say a quick word about who we are and what we do. The campaign works to end extreme sentences for children, and we do this all across the country in a variety of ways. We work for policy reform in the state legislatures and at the federal level. We work with lawyers who are challenging these sentences in court. And as we go about bringing about these sorts of reforms, we don't stop there. We see it as extraordinarily important to make sure that when policy is made, that it's implemented in a meaningful way. So we work with lawyers across the country and parole boards to make sure that people who are eligible for relief through the legislation that we pass have a meaningful shot at coming home and have a really meaningful chance at getting out of prison. And then after that, we actually do work with people who've come home from prison through our reform efforts. We've expanded our mission in recent years to support those individuals in a range of different ways, some of which we'll be talking about today. But we recognize that it's crucial for people who have been sentenced to life without parole and other extreme sentences as children to have really meaningful opportunities, not just to come home, but to be able to thrive in their communities. And so the campaign is dedicated to working on all of those fronts. We're doing it simultaneously. And we're also really trying to help elevate the fact that sentencing children to die in prison is a racial justice issue. We know that Black kids receive life without parole at a per capita rate that is 10 times that of white youth. And that is just one example of the extension of slavery in this country and the legacy of slavery and how it lives on in this country and of the institutional racism that continues to exist in this country. And so we really want to approach the work with a recognition of that and try to tackle these racial justice issues through our strategic communications work. And we also recognize that the people who are best suited to lead in this work are those directly impacted. So our model is one that really centers those who have been through the system and loved ones of those who've been through the system. We look to them for their expertise and their experience and their wisdom. And I think it's because of them that we've had the kind of success that we've seen over the last few years. Just since 2010, actually next week marks 10 years since the Supreme Court issued the Graham v. Florida decision that banned life without parole for children convicted of non-homicide crimes. And since then, the U.S. Supreme Court has stepped in 2 more times to dramatically limit life without parole for children. Simultaneously, the number of states that ban life without parole for children has gone from 5 to 23 plus Washington, D.C. So we've had extraordinary momentum with broad-based support for reform from folks on both sides of the aisle, with a really robust coalition behind us in this work, which is really exciting. And as a result, more than 600 people who were told as children that they were going to die in prison are now free, and they're in the community. And they're out there with us in this moment, walking with us through this public health crisis. And they're on my mind. They're in my heart at this moment. And I certainly feel like we are all in this together and doing what we can. And yet it never feels like enough. So the campaign has really stepped up our efforts in recent weeks to try to respond to this crisis and the way it's impacting our folks in the community, as well as those who remain in prison. And Preston and Eric and Xavier are going to share a little bit more about what that work looks like. But first, I just want to extend my gratitude to all of you. One of the things that we've done in recent weeks is we had a very generous donor initiate a challenge grant. So we had a fundraising campaign over the last few weeks where we had this donor was willing to match every dollar we raised through this upcoming Wednesday. And we have had so much support from folks all over the country. Gifts, large and small, have come in. We've had over 120 donors give to this campaign over the last few weeks. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who've given. We really, really appreciate it. We see you. We are with you. We feel so much stronger with you there alongside us. There is still time to contribute. For those who are interested, the campaign ends this Wednesday. And until then, every dollar will be matched by this very generous donor that has launched this matching campaign. So Thank you. And I just want to turn it over to my colleague, Preston, who's going to share a little bit about what the work is looking like in this moment, doing our advocacy work in light of the COVID crisis. Preston.
Thank you, Jody. And yeah, I'll just reiterate how grateful I am, because the donations that we receive make it possible for us to continue to push policymakers to abolish life without parole and other extreme sentences for kids, and to recognize that kids are deserving of a second chance. So right up until the pandemic really hit, I and other members of the legal team and movement building team, we were traveling. We were in the middle of the legislative session. In fact, right before everything kind of shut down, I was just before the call started, I was remembering that I was over in Annapolis with my colleagues Eddie and Crystal, and we were testifying in support of legislation in Maryland. And I was joking on the flight home. The lady I sat next to on the plane sterilized her seat like she was about to do surgery on it, and that to me signaled that something is serious going on, unprecedented. And so what ended up happening was, all these state legislatures suspended their sessions or adjourned early. And so we really had to quickly shift gears, knowing that our legislative advocacy and our policy work was going to look very different from what we had anticipated at the start of the session. So the goals that we have set are really based on three different kind of buckets. And we're partnering with a lot of other organizations to accomplish these goals. There's so many folks around the country at the state and federal level that we're working with. I'm on calls every week with folks kind of thinking about strategy and what needs to happen. And so those three buckets are, number one, first and foremost, decarceration. We know that prisons, unfortunately, are a place where social distancing is not possible. And so we want to see as many people as possible released from prison. And you're hearing about that. You're hearing more people say the word decarceration than I recall ever hearing before. And so that's the first big push. We want to see people released from prison. A lot of times when you hear people talk about that, they go immediately to like nonviolent drug offenders, people who are elderly, or over a certain age, or people who are medically vulnerable. And those things are all appropriate, but for our purposes, we also recognize that folks who were convicted and sentenced for crimes they committed while they were still children, that they are an essential part of the decarceration conversation, because we know that somebody who is sentenced as a child, that they hit a certain age, where their likelihood of them reoffending is just next to nothing. So there's no threat to public safety in releasing them. That's why we see over 600 people who've been released who are out there doing so very well. So a big part of what we're contributing to the conversation about decarceration is shining a light on that population and trying to remind people that they are an essential part of the conversation, that they deserve to be thought of, when we talk about decarceration. The second bucket is protecting folks who are currently incarcerated. And that means, widespread testing. We want to see protective gear available for folks. When somebody tests positive, they need to be separated, but not in a punitive way. We don't want people put in solitary confinement and call that quarantine. So that's another big thing that we're interested in, is for the folks who are incarcerated, we will see them be protected. And then third, when people are released, we want there to be good support for them in terms of housing and cash assistance and programs. And so you may have heard, folks may be aware that the House just released, the House of Representatives just released its bill. They're calling it the HEROES Act. And so part of what we're pushing for, the House is probably going to vote on that today. But whatever ends up happening with the vote, we just want to keep reminding folks that decarceration, protecting folks who are locked up, and then providing them support upon reentry are crucial. The other thing that I'll say before I kind of wrap up my initial comments is that since the legislative sessions are basically stalled in most states, the people who can actually do something about the incarceration problem is kind of small. So basically, the people we're targeting with our advocacy efforts right now are governors, prosecutors, and parole boards. And so with respect to governors, we have published, Jody published an op-ed in the Washington Post calling on governors to exercise their clemency power. So far, we've been pretty disappointed that we haven't seen more governors taking action to grant clemency to folks who are deserving. With respect to parole boards, we authored a letter along with about 30 other advocacy organizations who joined in that we sent to all the parole boards around the nation, encouraging them to grant expedited review to people who were sentenced as children. And we had a laundry list of things in that letter that we encouraged parole boards to do, but that was front and center. That people who are sentenced as children get expedited review and consideration, and even a presumption in favor of release unless there's evidence, that they're not a suitable candidate. And then with respect to prosecutors, we're continuing to partner with progressive prosecutors. We had an op-ed published in Michigan calling on prosecutors to not oppose sentence modifications because prosecutors have a great deal of power when it comes to being able to support release for folks who are deserving. So we're certainly continuing to meet with other advocacy organizations and strategize about effective ways to reach the people and influence the people who have the authority to act so that we see folks being released, being protected, and being supported upon reentry.
Thanks so much, Preston. Xavier, why don't you share a little bit about what your work looks like in this time of the COVID crisis and some of the folks that we're looking to support in the community?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks to you two. Whenever I hear, so you all know, whenever I hear Jody and Preston talk, I just get charged up, and I just want to get back out there and get back to normal, which is really just standing on the front lines with other directly impacted leaders, CFSY staff, our national coalition partners and supporters, and just pushing this work. And so for me to hear it, this is always exciting, but yet it's still happening, right? It just now very virtually. I would be remiss if I did not, first of all, make mention and thank a lot of our movement building team. Well, I would say the directly impacted staff within CFSY. I mean, I love all of our team members, but I just hearing Jody talk about directly impacted leadership earlier today really just, sort of, moved a lot of emotions inside of me, just reflecting on how far we've come as an organization, as a movement, to say now we have 7 individuals, actually I think eight of us who are all impacted by the justice system in some way, who are leading the work of reform, of public education, of standing in the way of past traumas to help heal our community, who are standing in the way of the day-to-day challenges that impact family members. And so how that translates into my life today is still being very much connected with our community, still being very much in partnership with others across the country, but yes, again, but virtually, and trying to ensure that our community is taken care of. And so but I would say this, much of our self-care initiatives that are centered around healing are not new. This pandemic didn't bring about much of this work. In fact, we've been talking about self-care. We've been laser focused on the needs of our community members for a very long time. In fact, since the very beginning. But in the past 3 or 4 years, we've been laser focused on this. The fact of the matter is that many of us who have been in the system, many of us who have loved ones who are serving inside the system, have had to live through the day-to-day reality of having past trauma, of having loved ones inside. And so we try to build out self-care strategies and initiatives to address those needs. And the fact of the matter is that many of us, we share our stories on a day-to-day throughout the work of public education and advocacy. We revisit, old experiences, and we reopen scars, and that can be deeply re-traumatizing. And so we're just constantly and consistently focusing on ways to tend to our community and to ensure that we're not causing harm. Although many of us, we simply have a hard time saying no because this is our passion. We're consistently reminding our members to be mindful of their self-care and to prioritize that. And so for the past 3 years, we've been fortunate to have self-care retreats. And those experiences have meant a few things. Being able to travel, many of us, dozens at a time, to faraway locations in the country. We're in Michigan last year. The year before, we were in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And what we would do, we would convene members of our ICANN community leaders to come together to talk through our past experiences, to dig deep and really just do some deep soul searching around the issues of self-forgiveness, of survivor's guilt, of forgiving others. The fact that it matters that many of us were harmed growing up. Trauma is like the dominant theme in our community. Sadly and unfortunately, that's what manifested in the poor decisions that we made as kids. And so we don't forget that reality. And so with the great leadership of Eddie Ellis, who I think of as sort of our godfather of self-care, we've been able to envision a better world in which we've been able to prioritize our own self-care. And of course, thinking back upon the early thoughts of this, of course, James Ross, our former director of outreach and engagement, who helped to create these initiatives, and now seeing these experiences manifest more deeply and more intentional with the leadership of others, including Lori James Townsend and other consultants who've helped us to understand, the importance of self-care strategies, the importance of coping mechanisms, the ways in which we engage the work, and of course, in how we live our day-to-day lives with others who perhaps may not understand what we went through. And so just having a space to be able to dig deep and to discover new means to conflict resolution and learning how to say no, right? And so that's a big part of what we experienced there at our self-care retreats. And we all, of course, we have our National Family Network calls in which we connect with family members, and now more so, especially because of the loved ones who are still in the system, we're deeply concerned for their loved ones. We're consistently talking around with the challenges, what they're hearing from the inside, helping them also to remain engaged in the work that they have always been engaged in. In fact, the family members are the ones who first envisioned this mission, who first envisioned a world where their kids and their loved ones would be treated, in racially equitable ways, in trauma-informed ways, in age-appropriate ways. Like, these are the things that parents and other loved ones had dreamed of when they lost their loved ones, their children, to the system. And so we've worked very closely with them through national calls every month to strategize, to tend to their needs, to provide resource information, and to consistently be a sounding board to the concerns that they have in states across the country. And we also have a monthly mailer or email, a monthly email to ICANN members, which focuses on things like nutrition, which focuses on things like coping strategies and how to deal with relationship problems. The fact of the matter is that many of us, we all grew up in this system. Everyone who was a part of ICANN, we grew up within as children, came out as adults. And so in essence, many of us are living adulthood for the first time as grown men and women who have never truly experienced what it means to have undergone or gone through normal developmental milestones of life, right? And so those milestones we are addressing head on. And whether it's helping people to talk through challenges in relationships, whether it's talking about the importance of getting back and pursuing academic and vocational careers, things that they would be interested in. We try to make those connections for them and get them involved in that way. Another important part of our work, quite naturally, even apart from our COVID-19 response, has always been to engage them in these experiences throughout our national convening, through our impact days. Things, whenever we come together and convene in person, we ensure we have a space for self-care, healing, and that's important to us because we never want to lose sight of that. And so that's the number one priority as a national network. and as a national family network, which is consistently on the front lines giving of themselves. I would say more so now than ever, of course, in response to COVID-19, again, we are virtual. And so we have built out several programs in the past few weeks to be COVID-19 specific in terms of needs. The fact of the matter is that many of our ICANN members, and let me just remind you all, our ICANN members are individuals who are not just, formerly incarcerated people. These are individuals who consistently have been on the front lines of the work. These are the individuals who have, attended multiple national conference of state legislator events. These are individuals who have, camped outside of the U.S. Supreme Court and waited for many hours to be able to fill in those seats and to stand as living witnesses and as living evidence to positive change. These are individuals who have testified in state capitals across the country, who have shared their stories in amicus briefs, who have opened up their hearts and been vulnerable in sharing their experiences through op-eds and other means of public education. These are individuals in so many ways who have truly transformed the movement. And so I want to first and foremost recognize these leaders and the work that they do, and to say, and perhaps it would be an understatement to say, that we are truly indebted to them. So to say that we are now standing in the way of what could be potentially more challenging amid this COVID-19 pandemic, trust me, it is something that we feel very much indebted to do. As much as the sacrifices that these leaders have made for the movement, we want to ensure that we are prioritizing their self-care needs more now than ever. And so now we have national ICANN calls, where monthly we come together with the leadership of Eddie Ellis and Lori James Townsend to talk about what's happening in our lives today, to understand the needs that exist in the current times, and most importantly, to be able to provide resource information, to encourage mental health services, whether it be therapy, whether it be other virtual means, to be able to address the needs of isolation, social distancing. For some members, honestly, this is reminiscent of incarceration, not all, but for some. And the fact of the matter is that many of our members who had just came out of prison were really just still in the throes of recreating their lives. They were just getting their jobs. They just started, they just learned how to drive, like they just got their driver's license. Like, these are individuals, many of them who served decades in prison since childhood and were in the throes of recreating their life, and very excitingly and very appreciatively doing that. And then suddenly the world had transformed. And so obviously to us, that we want to be mindful of that. And with that stated, we have leaned on our strategic partnerships. We have looked very closely and talked very intently with our supporters, and they have given and they have really supported the members within our national network. One example, Andy Burnt from Google, who very generously responded to the tech needs of our ICANN members, purchased and donated dozens of laptops to our ICANN members, who are now able to use that as a new means to connect virtually, to seek resources, and to seek job opportunities, even while we're in the midst of a pandemic. Obviously, those needs do not perish. And so I don't want to ramble on, but I just want to say, we're excited about the work. We're becoming more and more laser focused. We're evolving in our strategies of self-care. We're being very intentional about helping our community. In fact, we just started a group called Heart to Heart, where our ICANN women are now coming together and are really just, navigating this experience collectively, are really revisiting some of the experiences that are unique to their life experiences, given the fact that they went in as kids, given that trauma looks different in some ways for them, given the fact that they have so many unique insights and abilities to help inform our work. We wanted to help ensure that sacred space was created for our female ICANN members, all of whom went in prison as young girls and now are out as adults, rediscovering or learning for the first time what it means to be mothers, to be daughters, in a free world way, to be sisters and aunts, and to really just try to create create a life for themselves. And so that's some of the things we've been doing to ensure that our community is whole.
Thanks, Xavier. As you all can probably tell, this is really personal for all of us.
Yes.
It is something that we feel incredibly passionately about. This work is even more intense in this moment, even more urgent in this moment, which is why we're so grateful to have you all out there working alongside us in this. We are eager to hear your questions, so feel free to post those questions for us, comments, share with us what your concerns are in this moment about those who've been given extreme sentences as children, and we'll spend some time answering your questions, talking through some of these strategies that we've been pursuing. I did want to lift up a couple of things from what Xavier and Preston just shared. Xavier just mentioned that our ICANN members are, a lot of them who are more recently released or have just recently been released from prison after decades. They have real concrete immediate needs in this moment. And Xavier worked with our comms team and our strategic partnerships team to put together a video about 5 things that you can do to support these folks in this moment. So I want to make sure that you all get to see that, share that with your networks. It's just one thing that we can all do to try to encourage businesses to contribute in this moment to folks who are most vulnerable and in need and folks in our community. And Preston also mentioned the op-ed that the Washington Post published from my colleague at Koch Industries, Silas Horst, and me, calling for clemency consideration for people who went to prison as children and for expedited parole review for these individuals. I hope you all will consider sending that to your governors and making follow-up calls. We need to hold these decision makers and electeds accountable in this moment, because we know there are people in prison right now who are 100% rehabilitated, at risk of getting COVID, who need to be freed. And we know that there are people on both sides of the aisle who would encourage that review and their freedom in this moment. And so we really need to have a collective effort in this moment to put pressure on these decision makers so that they hear us and they know there's political cover and urgency in this call for review of these individuals in prison. I just want to turn back to Preston to share a bit more about what can folks do in this moment. I've given them one sort of call to action. What else can folks do if they're concerned about the people that we serve who are in harm's way?
So I think it would be, and then I was on the family call that we do every month a week or two ago, and I do think that folks are feeling sort of a sense of urgency. When you hear about someone like William Garrison, who unfortunately, tragically, unnecessarily died in Michigan, the first juvenile lifer to die, and he was so close to being released. Mm-hmm. Or when you hear about the lady, Miss Circle Bear, who was serving a 26-month sentence. She probably never should have been in prison in the first place, and was an excellent candidate to be released. And yet she died, and now her baby is without a mother. I think that when we hear these tragic stories, and certainly when we know and love people who are locked up, there's this strong sense of, well, we've got to do something. What can we do? What can we do? And so I think that one thing that I would encourage folks to do is to follow the campaign for the fair sentencing of youth on social media. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, sign up for our action alerts. I'm working on 2 action alerts right now pertaining to federal legislation, which I kind of alluded to earlier, and also to legislation that we have pending in Ohio right now. Ohio is one of the few states that has a year-round legislative session. And so we want to continue, since we have a window of opportunity, we want to push for it. So I would encourage folks to sign up so that you continue to hear about what we're doing. And when we need folks to start making calls to lawmakers, if you were aware of the Washington Post op-ed or the op-ed that ran in Michigan, being able to forward that and promote it in your own social media networks, and forward it to your elected representatives, parole board members. We are so dependent on people who are kind of the boots on the ground advocates in their own states. So I think about Virginia, that just passed their law abolishing life without parole just a couple of months ago, and what a huge victory that was. Could not have happened but for the family members and the advocates who were there in the state, because I can't always be traveling, to these different states to meet with folks, but they did it themselves.
Yep.
They
Big
owned it.
shout
And
out
they
to the
did it
families in
themselves.
Virginia. Woo woo!
Absolutely. And so I've seen folks pop up on the chat here from Ohio and New Mexico. Certainly, we have great networks in Michigan and just around the country. And so staying plugged in to find out what we're working on, and when the time comes to send emails, to make calls, to know to do that. And obviously, the support that we get from folks. Every little bit helps, and so it's wonderful to feel propped up, by such a huge support system.
Great, thank you, Preston. And I see we've got a question here from one of our viewers who is dear to us, and she's asking about her fiance who is in prison serving a life sentence for a crime he committed as a child. And Xavier, given your discussion of self-care, what is it that loved ones can do for folks who are on the inside to try to emphasize the importance of self-care? What strategies can we give to them on the inside?
I would say this, just recognizing, looking at the amazing stalwart advocacy and passion of our NFN members. What I see in many of the loved ones is, on point in terms of support. Of course, consistently writing letters, consistently remind them that they're remembered, putting money in their commissary, right? Like that's important. One example, what we were able to do recently, thanks to the amazing DC teams, we were able to send self-care packages. We were able to order through their commissary accounts, and we sent these packages, which consisted of sanitizer, of soap, deodorant, some goodies, to lift their spirits. We did this recently, in fact, last week, to several of our currently incarcerated individuals who are there potentially awaiting release, who are fighting their cases still in wake of these U.S. Supreme Court decisions and our efforts. But the fact of the matter is that their lives are in the line of fire of COVID-19, and so we want to ensure that they know they're remembered. I can tell you one thing that's for certain in my own experience, and what was most important to me, knowing that my family was there, knowing that I was consistently thought of, knowing that there are people who are on the outside who are rooting for me, was the greatest consolation and support. And so if you want to take it a step further with self-care, send or ask, what are some books that they would enjoy reading? What are some materials that they would like to look at? Getting letters from my nieces with colorful drawings that they did during their spare time was always uplifting to my spirit. So like just little things like that make the world of a difference, to brighten up our world while inside can truly contribute to our peace of mind and our ability to navigate even the most challenging times.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we've got our social network groups on Facebook, our National Family Network group and our ICANN network group. And I think both of those are places where if you post the person's name and address, you're likely to have that individual flooded with letters. I know I've seen a few people do that for loved ones in prison right now who are struggling. I personally sent a letter with drawings from my children to a couple of folks, just knowing that every little bit helps in this moment and that we're in this together. And so, do use our Facebook pages and our community and lean on us, because, we want to be there for you in this moment. I want to encourage folks to keep sending your questions in. I also just want to take a moment to flag another resource that the campaign has recently put out. In this moment of the COVID crisis, we recognize that we needed to come up with new ways of communicating with you all. And so we developed a conversation series that touches on a whole range of different issues, but it really highlights the leadership of those who are directly impacted, who are featured in every single video series. And one of the really important conversations that I just want to highlight is one that our colleague Crystal Carpenter did with Dr. Clint Smith, who is an educator and recently completed his PhD And their conversation is one that I think is really important because it touches on or goes deeply into the disproportionate impact of COVID on people of color and how that connects again to a long history in our country of institutional and systemic racism that is also very prevalent and apparent in our justice system. And so I would encourage you all to take a look at that. You can find it on our YouTube page. It's a really worthwhile conversation, and I would encourage you to share it. I mean, look, people are in their homes consuming more, I know I am, online than ever before. And it's a time to share new knowledge and to use it as an opportunity for people to learn about the reality, which is that, you know, we have as a country been systemically oppressing people of color since slavery. And that has shown up in a range of different ways over the course of history. COVID being a very obvious outcome, and it really brings into focus, this history and the work we have left to do. And that's why at the campaign, we're really focused on addressing this. I mentioned earlier, this racial justice issue of condemning our children to die in prison. We know that it is Black children who disproportionately get this sentence, and it's a cruel, barbaric practice, and one that really needs to be addressed. So we are delighted. We have people who are joining us from all over the country today, from Wisconsin, California, Ohio, New Mexico, DC. We see you, we're with you. We appreciate all that you're doing. Please keep us posted on where we can plug in to support your work. As Preston said, we rely on you all as the experts on the ground to tell us where we can, step in to bolster, your efforts on the ground. Preston, are there other things that you want to flag for folks today about things they can do in this moment to support the work and to really take action to bring folks home? Maybe you could share a little bit more about our efforts to advocate with parole boards specifically, and around parole fees, because we know a lot of folks are dealing with those.
Yeah, so I think that we posted on the little chat a link maybe to where folks can read the letter that we drafted to the parole boards around the country. And of course, every state's a little bit different, but Arkansas did a great thing. The Board of Parole there in Arkansas waived supervision fees, knowing that the COVID crisis is an economic crisis as well as a public health crisis. And so Arkansas took that step and is kind of leading the way by waiving supervision fees. That's one of the things that we encourage parole boards around the country to do. We encourage them as well to, if somebody has been granted parole, but that grant is sort of contingent on completing some sort of a program. I know here in Tennessee, there was just an article in I think the local paper that basically said that about 1,000 people have been granted parole in Tennessee, but are waiting on programming, and the programming has been suspended. And so they're just sitting there, having been granted release, found suitable for release. Well, that's one of the things that we've said to parole boards. This can't happen. If you've granted somebody parole, don't worry about the programming that may or may not be suspended. Just go ahead and release the folks who you have concluded are suitable. If Tennessee does that, there's 1,000 people that are no longer locked up. And a local lawyer named David Rabin wrote an op-ed to that effect. And so that's something that folks can do, that you can contact the members of your parole boards and say, look, if you've got people locked up that you've already had hearings for and have granted them conditional release, eliminate the condition and let's go ahead and get people home. So making those kinds of calls is certainly important. One thing that we're going to be doing that I actually had a call this morning with somebody, a local advocate, since we're not able to travel right now and we're not able to meet in person the way that we ordinarily would. We are looking at doing some sort of virtual lobbying events for lawmakers in states. And so what that would consist of, is having somebody like me or a local advocate kind of explain the issue of life without parole for kids, explain the brain science, explain the Supreme Court opinions, and the trend away from extreme sentences for kids and age-appropriate sentencing alternatives, and have policymakers and lawmakers on a Zoom call that maybe only lasts 45 minutes or an hour, but let them hear from directly impacted folks, from supportive family members, from supportive victims, as a way that we can go ahead and keep the conversation going that ordinarily we would be having in person. Ordinarily, Xavier or Eric or somebody and I would fly off to a state capital and meet with lawmakers. We can't do that right now. But over the summer, we're looking at setting up some of these virtual events. And so if that's something that you would be interested in having in your state, definitely get in touch with me. And we'll kind of brainstorm about what that might look like and how you could get involved and promote it. We're going to need to be promoting stuff like that when we're able to make it happen. So those are a couple of other things that I would point out.
Thanks, Preston. I think that's really important. I see we have a question coming in from Wisconsin. So it comes with some good news, which is that it looks like folks are getting paroled. Some juvenile lifers there are being paroled. And the question is, how can they get help creating a support group in Milwaukee for people who have come home, similar to ICANN? Xavier, you want to speak to that?
Well, first of all, I want to say welcome home to those who've made it out of that. It's interesting. Well, but I'm also mindful of the most recent beautiful thing that happened within our CFSY community as well. Crystal Carpenter's brother James was recently released. He was released last week. So just to have these rays of hope in our work, even amid this pandemic, has really just been fortifying for us and really just uplifting. And so for those who are coming home, just know for a fact that, whether it be a month, a week, or a year from now, that we are a family that's consistently and will always be present and available to be in their lives. Just know that we see every single formerly incarcerated individual, and particularly formerly incarcerated youth, as part of our family, as part of our national network and movement. And so I would just say, encourage them to learn more about ICANN, encourage them to see ICANN as really just a support, a sounding board, and a means to be able to, fulfill their desire to make a difference. That's really what ICANN is all about. In terms of local efforts to bring about, groups, I'm fortunate to also be a part of several groups. One that's local and that's dear to me, that's out of Precious Blood Ministries. It's the People's Liberty group, which is mostly formerly incarcerated youth, and they meet now virtually, much like all of us, obviously. But even prior to that, they came together to talk through their experiences, to think about local efforts, to help inform and lead advocacy efforts on the ground, to ensure that those that they left behind are not forgotten. So I would simply say, the moment you step into the room, whenever you're present with other leaders who are of like mind, who have similar desires and hopes for the other youth or for the children of tomorrow, like, the reality is that there are remarkable things that can happen in that space. ICANN began with 7 individuals sitting in a small room during the national convening of CFSY in 2013. We walked into that small room, we sat down, we had a CFSY board member who was there. We had James Ross was there, and Mary Lou and James Ross were just really there to hear our conversation, and something very miraculous happened in that room. All of us who were formerly incarcerated, all of us who went in as kids and came out as adults, all of us began to envision a national network. And fast forward now 6 years, we are 150 plus in over 30 states, and we have much to be proud of today. Things we never imagined while serving. That did come into fruition and did happen, looking at the reforms in many states, including Arkansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nevada, more recently Oregon and DC. Like, these are efforts that were led in great part by directly impacted people, and of course, along with the wonderful support of NFN leaders. So I would say just come together. And I promise you, you will find a way to build out a meaningful support system, because you have similar experiences, you have similar desires, and most importantly, you will recognize that the common identity and the very unique needs that you have, and most importantly, that only you can truly address those together. So I would say simply come together.
Thanks, Xavier. So one question that we just got was about whether we'll be having our national convening this year, and that is certainly something we are monitoring. I think we are mindful that it is something that really brings a lot of meaning to each of us and to our organization. To be able to gather together is really important. So if we aren't able to gather physically, we will figure out a way to gather virtually. And I hope folks will stay tuned, because we should have more information about that in coming weeks. If there are other questions, send them our way. I thought it was great to hear Xavier, you share a little bit about what's, some of these moments of hope that we've had, these last few weeks. And I just wanted to ask Preston, what brings you hope in this moment of crisis? Where do you see glimmers of, or what brings you joy and brings you a sense of purpose and hope in this moment?
Man, there's so many things. Some of them are small. I think some of them are just little tokens of hope. Little ways that you see goodness breaking in, and hope in the midst of a anxious and troubled and desperate feeling time. Certainly getting to see the video of Crystal and her brother when he was released. Such a token of hope. One person, but man, what a difference that makes. Seeing Virginia abolish life without parole for kids, that was, had been such a tough state, for so long, and seeing the commitment of Senator Marsden to see that through, Delegate Lindsay and other folks who worked over there. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I'm hearing the word decarceration more and more often from unlikely people sometimes. One of the things that gave me hope that springs to mind is, I forget what exactly was happening. I think it was Nancy Pelosi, but she pulled specifically from some of the recommendations that we helped draft during a press conference, and went so far as to allude to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, where it talks about what we do for the least of these, for the most vulnerable, is the most important. And I thought, well, goodness, to have somebody in leadership who's so influential, to be publicly talking about folks who are incarcerated and caring for them, and not forgetting about them. I think that's a huge sign of hope, So I know it's easy for folks to get bogged down. It's a difficult time, especially when people that you love are in prison and feel so helpless, But I see signs of hope all around, and it's just a real pleasure to get to work with you, Jody, and Xavier, and the rest of the CFSY team, continuing to find new and creative ways to elevate those stories, to help people cultivate hope.
Yeah, definitely. Xavier, do you want to share another word of hope for folks in this moment?
Yes. What gives me hope is that just a month ago, well, 2 months ago, we were doing our usual business. We were planning our annual convening. We were looking forward to our self-care retreat. We were already planning our impact day. We were, working with national partners and coalition partners who really, really help support the work. And we did not see, much like everyone who's viewing this right now, we didn't see the world transforming in an instant. We did not see, what we had no idea what it was like to live through a pandemic, and it was devastating. And it continues to be devastating on many levels for many of us, especially for those who are inside the system, unprotected, and unfortunately, some with very little support. And so we feel very much driven in that way. And I think that recognition, and especially with the love and support we have and it's particularly our affinity towards our directly impacted community who has helped to lead this work and has been so transformative to the movement. I think that has given us the ability to really adapt, to acclimate ourselves to the existing order of things, to believe that this work still is possible, and to show and prove that, to lean on their strength and their insights, and to recognize the needs that exist in this time, to be more targeted in our approach, more strategic in our efforts, and most importantly, more intentional around the needs of those who are still inside, much like we always have. And so what gives me hope is to know that the work is continuing. What gives me hope is to know that with your leadership, Jody, and with your leadership, Preston, and with many others within our team, and that no matter what comes our way, that the movement to end life without parole for age-appropriate, racially equitable, and age-appropriate trauma-informed accountability measures, that movement to ensure that happens for all kids in our country, no matter what happens, we will continue that work, and we will continue to deal with the fires as we move forward. And so it gives me hope to know that we now have new things to look forward to. We now have a virtual self-care retreat to look forward to. We now have a virtual impact day to look forward to. We now have stronger relationships, deeper bonds with each other, a stronger, more robust coalition of people who believe in us, and our supporters who are doing unorthodox, extraordinary things to ensure that we're taken care of. Like, that gives me hope. And so I can go on, but I just want to say that, despite everything, all the madness and sadness, and of course the despair that's happening in this moment for many, I thank God to be able to still be able to do this work, and to be able to stand in the way of harm and try to protect the most vulnerable during this most challenging time. That gives me hope to be able to continue on that work.
Thanks, Xavier, and thanks, Preston. Yeah, I think hope is such an important thing for us to hold on to in this moment. I will say these last 9 weeks, they've been exhausting, I think, for all of us, even those of us who are really fortunate and privileged to keep working and have roofs over our heads. And I think the reality is that we recognize that there is a lot of uncertainty, and particularly when it comes to our loved ones who are still in prison. I think all of us feel a real sense of urgency and motivation to do all we can. And there's no way we'd be able to do all of this without each other. I say that, because that's what brings me hope, is just the recognition that we're in this together. I hope we never forget how we belong to one another, how each and every one of us has a role to play in this moment to get us through. I think about our staff at the campaign who are working tirelessly right now. It's an extraordinary team of people who are giving so much of themselves in this moment. For those who are still behind bars and those who've come home, I'm inspired by them daily. I think about the ICANN members who are out in the community, serving those in need, giving back, serving the first responders in different ways, advocating for the loved ones that they left behind in prison. I think about our business partners at Verizon and Lyft who are giving services to those who are home now and who need these sorts of services, ride credits, and help with filing for unemployment. People who are in need, who recognize that and are being responsive, are partners in this work. All the people who've contributed, as I mentioned earlier, we've had a fundraising campaign going that ends this Wednesday, and all donations between now and Wednesday will be doubled. We've had over 120 people give. We are deeply grateful for every contribution that's come in. And for those who remain behind bars, and the fact that we know that they're holding on to hope and that they are pressing on. So we certainly will. We at the campaign are right there with you all. Extraordinarily grateful. I just want to give another shout out to the communications team of the campaign, Sahar, Adam, and Karma, who are behind the scenes in this moment, helping us communicate with all of you and doing extraordinary work more than ever before in this moment while we're all at home, trying to make sure that the work continues and that you all out there in the world are connected with us. This connection is more important than ever. Know we are here. We appreciate you. Look forward to hearing with you, stand with you as this fight continues. So thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.